A 64-mile ultramarathon should not come down to a sprint finish, but this race did. This has to be the craziest finish of any race I've ever been a part of. If you want to hear the story of a man jogging in the woods for 15 hours, then buckle up. So 2 years ago, I participated in a 64-mile ultramarathon in the dead of winter in Wisconsin called the Frozen Otter. It takes place about an hour north of Milwaukee, and yeah, it's 64 miles in frigid temperatures. 2 years ago, when I attempted this race, there was 7 inches of fresh snow and temperatures were in the single digits. Only 5 people finished that year, and I was not one of them. I came back this year for redemption. The conditions this year were much easier than 2 years ago. There was maybe only 1 inch of fresh snow, and although the temperatures were still really cold, dipping into the single digits overnight, there was hardly any wind, so it wasn't that bad. A mistake I seem to make in all of these ultra-distance events is to go out too fast, and I made that same mistake this time. I tried to take it out slow, but within the first 3 miles, I found myself in a conga line with the front group of runners. I started chatting up the guy who was running behind me and found out that he had just recently finished a 250-mile ultramarathon. So yeah, I was definitely overmatched. I took a little bit of comfort because I recognized that the girl who was near the front of the group had just recently posted in the Facebook group how this was her first ultra, and she was making sure she had all the appropriate gear. And I thought, well, if that noob thinks she can hang with this group, then maybe I can too. That assumption would prove to be very wrong. So everybody in this front group had their just tiny little packs, and then there was me with this giant 35-liter pack packed to the brim, practically carrying a suitcase on my back. So the first leg of this race is from Mothie Lake to the Butler checkpoint. The Butler checkpoint was unmanned this year just to kind of increase spacing due to COVID concerns. Everyone in that front group was just in and out of that checkpoint, except for me. I stopped and took off this heavy jacket I was wearing because I was burning up, and by the time I got back on the trail, everyone was way ahead of me.
So in and out of CP1. Making a really good time, probably going way too fucking fast, but just running with a group, which is pretty fun. So 7.9 miles in an hour and a half.
I did manage to push it a little bit and catch up to one runner ahead of me, a guy named David, who I found out has completed 6 200-mile ultramarathons. Yeah, what's 64 miles when you can go and run 200 miles? I thought David and I were making good time, but we came into the second checkpoint at Greenbush, only to find out that we were 10 minutes behind. They were really moving.
16 miles in, just went through checkpoint number 2 at Greenbush. In much better shape than 2 years ago, but the trail conditions are considerably better. I was definitely running low on calories. Coming into that second checkpoint, starting to drag on, but a couple of ramen noodles and some scratch and feeling better.
The Frozen Otter takes place on the Ice Age Trail, which is a trail that crosses the entire state of Wisconsin. This section of trail, although there aren't any really big hills, there's just a bunch of undulating hills. That's probably the hardest part I felt, was getting running after all of the, you hike up the hill and then convincing yourself to start immediately running again on any sort of flat section. David and I continued running again up to Highway P, the far north checkpoint. Man, the volunteers at this race were just incredible. It was kind of uncomfortable how nice they were. It's an interesting group of people who volunteer to go and hang out in frigid temps and be so helpful and have such a positive attitude. It was really uplifting every time I went through an aid station. Every aid station, I'd get my cup of ramen noodles and some cold scratch, which is a sports drink they had on course. I must have had over 2,000 calories worth of ramen noodles. I don't think I've consumed that much ramen noodles in the last 10 years combined. But it really hit the spot. At the Highway P checkpoint, I took my sweet ass time, swapped out my pair of socks because I felt some frostbite setting in, and I didn't want to get some frostbite like my buddy Adam did 2 years ago. David was long gone by that point, so I was all alone for the next section heading back south.
About 26 miles in, went through the third checkpoint a couple miles ago. Took some ibuprofen and caffeine pill and feeling pretty good. Changed out my socks, which were surprisingly wet. Apparently I'm in 5th place or something right now. I don't think that'll hold up.
So I made it back to the Green Bush checkpoint, and I asked one of the volunteers how close I was to the guy in front of me. I'd been running alone for the last 2 hours, and I just wanted somebody to run with. But he thought I was like being super competitive, so he said, and he told me, this race doesn't actually start until you get back to Mothie Lake for those last 18 miles, which would turn out to be an awfully prescient statement. So I continue back on towards Butler Lake.
It's so beautiful and calm out here. Let me show you. Just such a serene experience. I say that now. Another 20 miles, it'll be a hellacious experience.
As the sun set, the temperature started to drop as well. Thankfully, there was no wind, so it never got like super cold. It was a really beautiful night, like a full moon out there. And yeah, just super calm, no wind.
Isn't this a menacing little forest? I think this is where the main character always gets attacked by some sort of forest creature.
I was about ready to be done with this race by the time I made it back to Butler, but I still had another marathon ahead of me. But I was in pretty good spirits. The volume of training I had done in the couple of months leading up to this race definitely was paying off.
Just went through checkpoint number 5. Feeling pretty solid. I want to catch up to the guy in front of me so I have somebody to run with for the last 15 miles solo. Alright, let's keep moving. I think we're 38 miles in, so just a marathon left, right? An NBD.
There was one dude out there who was running without a headlamp, and he scared the shit out of me. I thought he was like the abominable snowman. Abominable snowman or something. He posted on the Facebook group. Yeah, I think it was this guy. Out there running without his headlamp turned on. You didn't need a headlamp, but I would, for whatever reason, just scared the shit out of me.
Isn't this chair super creepy? Just out here in the middle of nowhere. One plastic lawn chair. So, about 43 miles in, another 21 miles to go. Doing all right now. Definitely could use some more caffeine and maybe another ibuprofen. I packed this backpack way too heavy with way too much shit that I didn't need. And not only is it slowing me down, but it is killing my shoulders. But I'll be alright.
So I made it back to Mothie Lake, which is actually where the race starts. You still have the south out and back to do, but you're allowed to have a drop in there if you want to pick up some supplies. Rather than picking up any supplies, I actually ditched like half the things I was carrying around in my backpack.
So I just went through checkpoint 6, 18 more miles to go. The first through third place, which is made up of 2 girls, are way ahead, like an hour ahead, so no chance of catching them, but there are 2 guys who are like right behind me, so I don't know if it's worth it to really push it off to try to hold them off. But I took a whole bunch of stuff out of my bag, so it's much lighter now. Not hurting my shoulders as much. Alright, let's keep going. 18 miles left. Is this how you film the Blair Witch Project? Does that reference date me?
So the last 18 miles is an out and back south to Highway H. And this is actually where I dropped last year. I really thought the guys behind me were going to catch me. I wasn't moving that fast, but about 4 or 5 miles in, I looked behind me and they were nowhere to be seen. They were probably in the same painful spot I was in. About 2 miles before the Highway H checkpoint, the first place girl came flying by me going the opposite way. She was way ahead. She was just crushing the race. I saw the second place guy about a mile after that, but as I got closer and closer to the Highway H checkpoint, I hadn't seen the third place girl. Half a mile to the Highway H checkpoint, she and her pacer passed me going the opposite direction. I came into the Highway H checkpoint mumbling to the volunteers that I wish she was a lot further ahead of me than she was. Like if she was 2 miles ahead of me, that would have been way too far for me to make up in the 9 miles going back. But just 1 mile ahead was close enough that I thought, hey, if I really push this, I could maybe catch her. The volunteers must have thought I was delusional. I mean, I was just mumbling to myself and she was like 20 minutes ahead of me by that point. So 9 miles to make up 20 minutes. I was trying to do the math to try to figure out what pace I needed to run, but the basic algebra function of my brain had just quit by that point. I settled on, I just need to run much faster than I did coming out here. It must have looked like a man possessed as people were passing me going out to the Highway H checkpoint. I kept yelling at myself, "Come on, John, let's go!" And I kept thinking, every second you walk is 1 second you're gonna lose to the woman in third place. I asked a couple of the runners going the opposite direction how close I was to that woman and her pacer. And I just kept getting conflicting reports of like, you're either 5 minutes behind all the way up to 15 minutes behind. All the information was just super inaccurate. But I mean, what can you expect from people who have been running for 14 hours? So I kept the pace up. And then with 2 miles, unprovoked, one of the guys going the opposite way said I was really close to the woman ahead of me. And I said, how close? And he said, if you push it, you can catch her. I was already in a really painful spot right then, but yeah, kept trying to just maintain the pace, hold on. I was blasting some Linkin Park on my phone, like some emo teen from the 2000s. So less than a mile to go, I still had no sight of the lady in third. I thought, if I didn't catch her by now, I'm not gonna catch her. But then with a quarter mile to go, right before the finish line, I saw 3 headlamps in front of me, and I heard the volunteers at the finish line start shaking the cowbells. And I thought, man, I've worked so hard, but I'm gonna come up just a little bit short. But maybe at least I can make it look good and come in a couple of seconds behind her. I don't know where I got a finishing sprint after 63 miles, but I really kicked it in then and just started making up ground on her really quickly. And before I knew it, right before the transition from the trail to the concrete section where the finish was, I caught up to her and her pacers. There were 3 of them. I didn't know what to do, so I went flying around on the side on the snow. I definitely spooked one of her pacers. And then I heard one of her pacers shout, "Run, Kim, run!" So I really kicked it in then, whatever sprint finish I had. Unfortunately, when Kim started sprinting to catch up with me, was right on the transition from the trail to the concrete, and it was super icy right there. And she slipped and fell. Had I caught her any sooner, she would have for sure beaten me. It took all of my energy just to catch up to her, and if I had caught her any sooner, she would have outkicked me for sure. So yeah, Kim posted in the Facebook group, "Fourth to the guy who gave me a run for my money in the final 50 feet of that race. We fought for third place and you earned it. Darn poles sure didn't help me on that asphalt with that epic wipeout. Definitely a memorable moment I won't forget." So yeah, I was super pleased with this result. Third place is the best I've ever done in any sort of ultra endurance event of this size. To work so hard that last 9 miles and have it actually pay off, and kind of in a super dramatic fashion, was pretty rewarding. I mean, nobody really cares what place you get in one of these ultramarathons. When you tell people you finished a 64-mile ultramarathon, nobody asks what place you got. So I finished about in 15 hours and change. The girl who won was that girl who posted on the Facebook group about how this was her first ultra. So congrats to her. She just demolished everyone. Out of the 93 people who started this race, 39 finished the entire thing, which is a really high finish rate for this race, especially compared to the 5 people that finished 2 years ago. So what's next after this? The reason I signed up for this race in the first place is because there's this race called Tuscobia, which I think is like 160 miles. in the dead of winter. And in order to even enter that race, you had to complete a qualifying race. And the Frozen Otter was one of those qualifying races. Big thanks to Rod, who's the race director of this race. I've only done this race twice, but it's been excellent every year. The volunteers were fantastic, and all the people I ran with were really encouraging as well. The ultra running community is, I think, super unique in that way. Just a super positive and quirky group of people. My next video, I think, is going to be about the training I did for this race, which was actually one of my goals for this year. We called it the KT Challenge. But basically, I only did long runs in my training for this race. I'll make a video about that. Stay tuned. So when you finish the Frozen Otter, you get a set of dog tags. The Frozen Few. 64 miles, 24 hours. The slogan of this race is perfect. I love it. For the love of misery. I was definitely miserable out there for a good chunk of this race. But looking back now, I'd definitely do it again.